This is a production of the White Dragon Podcast Network, WDPN, bringing you the very best in Internet Talk Radio.
Well, another Wednesday is upon us, and that means another exciting chapter of Storybook Radio presented by the White Dragon Podcast Network. You're listening to episode 12 for Wednesday, August 12, 2015. This podcast is all about sharing my love of Walt Disney World and Universal Studios with you through a series of stories and historical looks at these magical theme parks. As always, you can find lots more over at StorybookRadio.com, including a blog, photos, and lots of travel tips. Today's episode is going to take us over to Frontierland at the Magic Kingdom for the wildest ride in the wilderness, Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. It was twilight when I first arrived. An old and broken down blacksmith's cart on the side of the road was what first tipped me off that I was in the right place. They called it a mountain back in town, but it didn't really look like much of one. It started off stout but turned skinny in the middle, stretching up into the sky. It looked more like an Indian teepee than a mountain. Nearby locals said the mountain was haunted. I could understand the Indians that used to live here 100 years ago thinking that. They followed folklore and mythology, but it seems strange that the locals today would still think those same old stories were true. Imagine a mountain god that was actually a giant bird, clapping its wings when miners tried to take gold from the mine beneath it to trap the miners inside. Who could believe that? No, the only thing that was true here was that no one had prepared for the rain, and a deluge had wiped everything out. You couldn't mine if there was a risk of cave-ins, and that's what rain did to mines. End of story. The one thing I couldn't explain, though, was the stories I had heard of locals in the next town over, swearing they could hear train wheels clattering over the tracks, and a train whistle piercing the sky. There had been reports of music emanating through the night and the wide open skies, out-of-tune piano keys flying in a frenzy, as if the old saloon built by the Big Thunder Mining Company was open for business again, its shady clientele saddling right up to the bar and ordering 3 fingers of moonshine. Maybe it was all in their heads. Old stories, of course, are like trees. Their roots take hold, and before we know it, a mighty oak has grown. Either way, I was intrigued, and so here I was, in the ghost town called Tumbleweed. A wooden sign hung up by rusted chains swayed overhead. I shone my flashlight on it and saw fading yellow letters printed there, spelling out Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. The wood was waterlogged and swollen in parts, splinters poking out every which way. A gust of wind picked up, cold for this time of year, and the sign swayed a little more heavily, its rusty chain sending a high-pitched snarl into the darkening sky. I walked on, heading inside the building that appeared from out here to have served as a train station and offices for the mining operation that had once kept the town of Tumbleweed afloat. The inside of this building, now home to generations of spiders and a few rats from the looks of things, was like a time capsule. Relics of the gold rush were everywhere. Shovels, picks, boxes of dynamite, old plungers, cargo trunks. While I definitely did not want to come across any angry native gods or the ghosts of dead miners, I admit that I felt a tinge of disappointment when I came across 6 trains, 3 on each track, parked right there at the platform. From the looks of them, they had been there for decades, wheels rusted in place, cobwebs creating a thick lattice over the train cars. No, these trains hadn't moved. I don't know what the locals think they had heard, but it wasn't self-propelled, ghostly mine trains. I decided to walk the track. The first part was trickiest. It had a sharp ascent, and I could feel the flutter of bats flying above me, their wings flapping excitedly in the darkness above. I walked all the way around it, finding nothing ghostly here, just a bunch of decrepit artifacts strewn about the track and the surrounding hillside, stagnant floodwater engorging the wooden beams into which the splayed tracks were bolted a century earlier. A buzzard cawed in the distance. It looked at me when I hit it with the beam from my flashlight before continuing to pick at whatever bones it had found. It seemed that this was going to be a short night, with no real discoveries afoot. Just as I was about to start heading back to the main building, I saw a glint of light in my flashlight beam. I bent down and picked up a gold nugget. Well, I guess this evening wouldn't go completely to waste. I had a nice little souvenir to take home. I slipped it into my pocket and started to walk again. But I was only able to take a few steps before I stopped once more. Was that a low rumble I had heard? As if to answer in the affirmative, a couple of pebbles rolled down the mountain face beside me. Suddenly, I heard a low sound not too far behind me. It seemed to be coming from the boarded-up saloon that I had passed a few minutes ago. It sounded like jangly piano keys, and was that a gale of laughter? I looked behind me, squinting to see that far with no light to assist me. There was definitely a square of light illuminating the tracks now, and it seemed to come from that very same saloon. This couldn't be. I willed my legs to move and began walking quickly over the tracks, and then broke into a run. It wasn't long before my foot tripped over one of the wooden planks and I landed hard, sending up a shower of gravel in my wake. I heard the rumble again, only louder this time, and a rock much, much larger than a pebble came tumbling down the mountain in front of me, only a few feet from where I was lying on the tracks. With my face just inches from the metal berm of the track, I could feel its tinny vibration. I put my ear to it, and my blood went cold. There was definitely a train coming. The sound from the saloon had gotten louder too, the piano picked up, and it sounded like a fracas had broken out. I turned around, and a beam of light was growing larger and stronger against the rockwork, coming from around the mountain, from the far side of it. I could hear the chugging of the engine now, the high-pitched squawk of the rusted wheels, the plaintive mewing of tracks that hadn't supported the weight of a train in who knows how long. Just then, I remembered the gold nugget in my pocket. Could it be? Could the old stories be true? I wasn't proud enough to let my cynicism be my death. I took the nugget out of my pocket and placed it back on the track where I found it. Everything went quiet then, just as suddenly as it had started. There were no longer lights in the distance. Against my better judgment, I walked back to the saloon. It was dark and all the windows and doors were still boarded over. I trudged back along the track and back to the train platform. All 6 trains were right there where I had left them earlier, all caked with dust and cobwebs, just as before. I walked out, the town of Tumbleweed to my back, and vowed never to return. It seemed that the mountain was still keeping its treasures safe, even after all these years.
Hey WDPN listeners, this is Allie Eibler from the Geek Watchtower. And as you know, we live in the golden age of geek culture. With all the movies, television shows, comic books, video games encompassing the world of geekdom, it can be a real chore to keep up with all of it. Well, here on the White Dragon Podcast Network, we have a little something called the Geek Watchtower. Kevin Kessler, Chris Doherty, and I run down the latest geek news items every Friday morning for you, before we focus on a fandom feature topic of the week. We're talking about everything from Batman to the Avengers, anime, Doctor Who, Disney, Nintendo, and so much more. So make sure you join Kevin, Chris, and I every Friday morning in the Geek Watchtower, where we monitor all the things that geeks watch. Find it on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and of course at WhiteDragonPodcastNetwork.com.
Hey guys, this is Corinne Chandler from Miscellaneous Discussions, the Disney television and movie talk show here on the White Dragon Podcast Network, reminding you that every Monday is Miscellaneous Monday on WDPN. Kate Smith, Kevin Kessler, and I pick a different Disney topic to discuss each week, ranging from top 5 lists to movie reviews to major announcements coming out of the Walt Disney Company. Then we close the show out with Kate's Disney Recipe of the Week, where she'll teach you how to make a variety of dishes only found in Walt Disney World, and I pose a trivia question to you all, meant to test your knowledge of all things Disney. So please tune in every Monday morning on iTunes, Stitcher, and WhiteDragonPodcastNetwork.com for a new and magical episode.
Nobody cares, Corinne.
Shut up, Kevin. I'm plugging your network.
Oh, okay, keep going. I like your announcer voice.
Thank you. Miscellaneous Discussions on WDPN. Come join us and let's get magical.
Friends, it all started with pirates. No story of Big Thunder Mountain, or even Frontierland as we know it, can be told without mention of swashbuckling buccaneers, or without mention of the original theme park, Disneyland. It was in 1967 that Pirates of the Caribbean first opened its doors to excited guests in Anaheim, California, and it was one of a kind. A dark boat ride through pirate enclaves and a story telling the myths of an ancient pirate curse, it captivated audiences right out of the chute. And so, it was only natural that when Magic Kingdom opened at Walt Disney World in 1971, parkgoers were running to the nearest cast member asking how to get to that pirates ride. Of course, in 1971, there were no pirates at Walt Disney World. Mark Davis, the legendary Imagineer who was the principal creator of Pirates of the Caribbean, was conceptualizing an attraction with a similar ride mechanism but a different theme, the Wild West. The Western River Expedition would be only one part of a much larger attraction and probably the biggest show building Disney would have ever built, called Thunder Mesa. The Mesa would have included a small runaway mine train as well, but Western River Expedition, the dark boat ride, would have been the e-ticket for the area. Essentially, Disney miscalculated the appeal of a pirates attraction in Florida. thinking that being so geographically close to the actual Caribbean would mean that Floridians would be more interested in a more exotic theme. They were surprised at the dismay in Walt Disney World of the absence of pirates. Disney gave in, and cast members even started to wear large buttons emblazoned with the words, "Pirates are coming." Mark Davis got to work on Disney World's Pirates of the Caribbean and delegated work of the Mine Train attraction to a young model maker in Imagineering named Tony Baxter. While Davis had only tasked Baxter with figuring out the design of the mountainscapes and topography of the attraction, Tony Baxter had a host of other ideas as to potential story and plot for the attraction and proceeded to work those ideas out. Management loved Baxter's ideas of a runaway mine car, its tracks built around existing landscape, and built it as a standalone attraction rather than as its original placement in a larger show building. Pirates of the Caribbean opened in Walt Disney World in 1973 and was doing well as a standalone, so the same idea applied to what would eventually become Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. The project ran up against another hurdle, though, after the opening of Pirates. Walt Disney World had opened in 1971 without any thrill rides, and the absence of thrills was becoming apparent. While Big Thunder Mountain would be thrilling in its own right, Disney needed to go bigger. 1969 saw the first human beings set foot on a surface that didn't belong to the planet Earth, when Neil Armstrong stepped onto the surface of the moon. America's fascination with space was at its zenith, and a perfect marriage of interest and ability emerged for Disney, and Space Mountain became the principal project for Imagineering in Florida. The Dark and Indoor roller coaster was the first of its kind anywhere in the world, as was the technology that propelled it, a computerized system that deployed multiple roller coaster cars in a steady sequence, keeping them on the track at the same time, separated by predetermined zones and braking systems. Essentially, the Walt Disney Company had developed a futuristic or advanced roller coaster system based on a futuristic science fiction-based plot and story sequence. Spending money on an old-fashioned Wild West-themed attraction without the same thrill level seemed redundant, and when Space Mountain opened in 1975, the Thunder Mesa project seemed to die with it. I mentioned earlier that no conversation about Big Thunder Mountain Railroad would be complete without talking about Disneyland. Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland wasn't an opening day attraction for Disneyland in 1955, but it did open 5 years later in 1960, during the lifetime of Walt Disney. It was a railroad attraction featuring audio-animatronic animals and designed by Pirates of the Caribbean guru Mark Davis in an attempt to add more fun and humor to the Disneyland lineup. Essentially, it can be described as Jungle Cruise on a railroad track. Years later, though, the impetus had shifted to adding more thrills in Disneyland, and the decision was made to refurbish the attraction, using Tony Baxter's original drawings from the Walt Disney World Big Thunder Mountain as the design. The scale would be different, of course. At Disneyland, the attraction would be situated right next to Fantasyland, and there was a risk present of making it look out of place. Luckily, Imagineers found images of an area of Utah called Bryce Canyon, replete with unique rock formations called hoodoos that almost looked like they had been taken from the pages of a storybook. In other words, they would not look out of place at all, positioned next to Fantasyland. Stonework expert Skip Lang set to work, making the scenery look authentic yet fanciful enough for its location in the park. Next, a story was needed. Imagineer John Patrick Burke came aboard the project and developed a story revolving around a Native American deity called the Thunderbird. Earthquakes would be caused by the Thunderbird anytime miners carried minerals out of the mine by clapping its wings. The mine would cave in and the miners would be trapped inside. Interestingly, this story is rooted in reality. Native Americans in the Southwest did believe in this Thunderbird god and would attribute cave-ins to the god being angry. They would board over caved-in mine entrances and disguise them, much to the chagrin decades later of bikers who would apparently drop into the holes. The next part of the story says that the earthquakes were only one part of the tale. Soon, mine trains began to rip around the tracks on their own, seemingly. The Big Thunder Mining Company, the mining company that was developed out of the funds from gold strikes on Big Thunder Mountain, abandoned their interests in the mountain and left. The name of the mining company and the story for the attraction were approved by Executive Vice President Marty Sklar. The attraction itself, named Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, was opened in Disneyland in 1979, and management at Walt Disney World soon commissioned their own version of the ride, the exact version that Tony Baxter had drawn years earlier, with the guidance of his mentor, Claude Coates. Big Thunder Mountain Railroad was the first attraction built in Disneyland without any input from Walt Disney. It took nearly 13 years after his death for the company to trust the Imagineers and the designers with ride design, interestingly. In Florida, Big Thunder Mountain Railroad would not be modeled after the hoodoos of Utah, but after the iconic red landscape of Monument Valley in Colorado. I am mostly familiar with this scenery from a few X-Files episodes, but this region of Colorado has actually been the backdrop of countless Western movies. Now, when Walt Disney built Disneyland, he wanted a pristine park. He hated rundown amusement parks and tacky fairgrounds. He wanted Disneyland to be a magical place, full of wonder and whimsy and immersion, and not one that would invoke memories of greasy shills and carnies. Disney even infamously kiboshed the first iteration of the Haunted Mansion because he thought it was too run down and forlorn. The inside, he said, was supposed to be covered with cobwebs and neglect, not the outside. However, Pat Burke wanted to bring the authenticity of an abandoned mining ghost town, and this included rickety tracks, lots of rust, and waterlogged and leaning buildings. The abandoned gold rush town of Tumbleweed, the setting for Big Thunder Mountain Railroad at Walt Disney World, demanded this treatment, and with legendary Imagineer and Executive Vice President Marty Sklar giving the rundown look the thumbs up, Tumbleweed came to life. As I said, it would be an abandoned gold rush town that had been partially inundated by flash floods, the uneven tracks nearly touching down into the deluge. One of the props along the track even invoked some of the mystic origins of the backstory. The partially submerged wagon of Professor Cumulus Isobar can be spotted there. He was the inventor of a rain-making machine that apparently caused much of this chaos. The attraction opened in 1980 and has been delighting audiences ever since, with its signature ascent through a bat-infested grotto, its sharp turns that sling you from one end of the mine train to the other, and its steep drops, arms raised and then quickly tucked under for fear of hitting the rockwork above. I think that with many attractions at Walt Disney World, how you ride is just as important as when you ride. In terms of addressing the when part, Big Thunder Mountain Railroad definitely develops long lines, so ride early or use a fast pass. As far as how you ride, this part is much more fun to talk about. Big Thunder Mountain Railroad is relatively tame as far as roller coasters go, with a top speed of 36 miles per hour. It's not the smoothest ride, but this is mostly by design. You will get tossed around quite a bit, especially if you sit towards the back. My wife and I always request the very last row for the best effect. Oh, and keep your eyes open. While Big Thunder Mountain Railroad is tame, the biggest payoff of this attraction is that thing that Disney Imagineers are king and queens of: storylines and detail. During your rickety trip around Big Thunder Mountain, you'll spot falling rocks, possums, buzzards, discarded dinosaur bones, and all kinds of pieces of mining equipment left behind by the Big Thunder Mining Company when Tumbleweed flooded. You'll see some buildings along the track as well, and riding the attraction at night means that you'll see lots of activity through their windows. Walt Disney World has lots of attractions that are absolutely superb at night: Seven Dwarfs Mine Train, Dumbo, Splash Mountain, but Big Thunder Mountain Railroad might be the best, with Tumbleweed finding new life at twilight and Cinderella's castle very visible in the distance. The sign for Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, a thick wooden sign with old-timey letters spelling out the title, is adorned above it with 3 letters interwoven with each other: BTM. However, a keen eye will notice that the M is actually an upside-down W, and that this design work allows it to be read as either Big Thunder Mountain or, with the M inverted, Tony W. Baxter, the creator of the attraction. In 2012, the queue was given fresh life thanks to the Scene 1 philosophy that has woven itself into many of Disney World's attractions. Kids can occupy themselves with spinning metal wheels or pushing down on dynamite plungers that actually send up real-life effects on the part of the track visible from that plunger, be it water, steam, or noise. When these enhancements were made, a fresh part of the storyline was created in order to further honor Big Thunder Mountain Railroad's creator, Tony Baxter. Baxter's portrait can now be found in the queue under the name Barnabas T. Bullion. Now, the following text can be found on the Disney Parks blog. According to the enhanced backstory, Barnabas T. Bullion is the founder and president of the Big Thunder Mining Company. The longtime mining magnate comes from a powerful East Coast family and considers gold to be his very birthright by virtue of his oddly appropriate name. In fact, he considers the ultimate gold strike to be his destiny. And that is why he is having so much trouble with Big Thunder Mountain. According to superstitious locals, Big Thunder Mountain is very protective of the gold it holds within, and the unfortunate soul who attempts to mine its riches is destined to fail. And so far, that prophecy is coming to pass. The mine has been plagued by mysterious forces and natural disasters ever since, and yet the Big Thunder Mining Company is still in operation. In fact, Bullion is discovering new veins of gold and digging new shafts every day, offering a closer look at the Big Thunder mining operation than ever before. but a word to the wise for anyone attempting to visit the mountain: watch out for runaway trains. Tony Baxter was officially recognized as a Disney legend at the D23 Expo in Anaheim in 2013. He has been quoted as saying, "Going into Big Thunder, I was a kid in a model shop. Coming out, I was a designer." Baxter worked for the Disney Company for 47 years, beginning as a 17-year-old. During that time, he oversaw construction of many attractions other than the 4 iterations of Big Thunder Mountain Railroad that exist around the world, including Star Tours. He said it was like a bomb went off when they announced the closure of Adventures Through Inner Space to build Star Tours at Disneyland. He also oversaw the Indiana Jones adventure at Disneyland, as well as Journey into Imagination at Epcot, and perhaps, most famously, Splash Mountain. I've always been amazed at one recurring theme in my research and Disney reading. The ability of the Disney Company to find talents from within and promote them seemed to be uncanny. Imagineers often started in very different, often unglamorous positions. Baxter himself was hired as an ice cream scooper on Main Street, USA at the age of 17, and held a variety of positions before catching the eye of WED Enterprises, Walter Elias Disney Enterprises, now Walt Disney Imagineering. There are 2 great ways to see Big Thunder Mountain Railroad in action without actually boarding the runaway train. The greatly underrated attraction, the Liberty Square Riverboat, puts you aboard the Liberty Belle, a beautiful steam-powered paddle wheel boat. As you round the rivers of America, you will float right past and very close to the attraction track. The other method is aboard the Walt Disney World Railroad. You will amble past scenes depicting Native American life and catch the runaway trains in action. Before arriving back at the Frontierland station, you will even pass through a tunnel carved out of the signature red buttes of Monument Valley before passing through Splash Mountain. And here's a bit of trivia. There are 6 trains in all, although only 5 can run at a time. Their names are I Be Hardy, I Am Brave, I Am Fearless, You Be Bold, You Are Courageous, and You Are Daring. In conclusion, Big Thunder Mountain Railroad is one of my favorite Walt Disney World attractions. I was never a big fan of roller coasters when I was a kid, so when I experienced this roller coaster for the first time as an adult at the age of 29, I wasn't sure what to expect. But I fell in love with this attraction, and we usually do it a couple of times each day that we're at the Magic Kingdom. For a Disney World nerd like me, who wants to see every little thing that the Imagineers have put into an attraction, Big Thunder Mountain Railroad is a goldmine, if you'll pardon the pun. I'm always spotting something new, and it's exciting each and every time. Just keep your eyes open and keep those arms in the air. Well, it's time now for a little segment that I like to call the Souvenir Minute. And I realized last week that I actually didn't do a Souvenir Minute during episode 11, which was the Harry Potter episode. So I really quickly want to talk about one souvenir that I really, really enjoyed. I don't really use it for anything because unless you have a friend that has the same item, you can't really even play with them. But the first time that we went to the Wizarding World of Harry Potter in 2011, it was at Hogsmeade Village in Islands of Adventure. And when I was there, I picked up a wand. I think that at the time, those first generation of wands were $30 each. And this was Dumbledore's wand. So essentially it is the, I forget what it's called now, but it's the main wand, the wand that is supposed to give you power over every other wand in the Wizarding World. And I really, really enjoyed the detail work, the very intricate printings that are on it, the fact that it looks hand-carved, little things like that I think are really, really cool. And it is a great souvenir to have. Now they've released, I think, a couple of other lines of wands as well, more of the characters' wands, but they've also introduced the interactive wands, which if you stand in certain locations in either Hogsmeade Village or Diagon Alley at Universal Studios, you can actually use the wands in order to make certain effects happen, whether it's a little drop of water shooting out of a fountain or making the lights turn on and off in an overhead area. Those wands are actually really, really cool. But the interactivity of those wands is limited to Universal Studios and Islands of Adventure, of course, and I think those wands go for about $50 each, although I'm not 100% sure. I also wanted to mention one other thing for the Souvenir Minute, because it's something that you don't really think about too much. Now, on the Simpsons attraction at Universal Studios, they make a joke that every ride must exit through the gift shop. It's either Kang or Kodos, one of the two aliens that makes that joke at one point in that attraction. And I was thinking about it because At the Magic Kingdom, I don't know if you've noticed or not, but there's not a ton of attractions there that seem to exit out of a gift shop. Haunted Mansion doesn't. Big Thunder Mountain Railroad doesn't. I don't think that Splash Mountain does either. Peter Pan's Flight doesn't. I found that kind of interesting, and I think that the next time that I go down to Walt Disney World, which is of course going to be later this year, I think I might have to go and try to find some Big Thunder Mountain Railroad merchandise, because I think it would be pretty cool if there was even a little gift kiosk outside of the attraction in order to sell some, what could be some pretty cool Big Thunder Mining Company branded merchandise.